The man who gave Celtic back to the people has kept his own counsel for 6 years. But ahead of a rare trip back to paradise, Fergus McCann spoke exclusively to Setanta Sports. Now living in Boston, the little man who played such a big part in Celtic survival took a walk down memory lane, opening his door to reveal for the first time the story behind his Celtic revolution. Where were you when you first thought that here's a club, your own club, because you were a supporter, and maybe it needs help, maybe I can do something for it?
Well, it actually started even before that. I was my first contact with the club directly as a club was back in 1972, when I was keen to try and I put on a closed-circuit broadcast, actually of cable, using a satellite for the first time. It was actually the first colour broadcast of a football game across the Atlantic by satellite, and rented Maple Leaf Stadium, Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, at great expense, and I sort of stuck my neck out and tried to make this thing work. It was Celtic against Inter Milan and Glasgow in March of '72, and as you may look it up, you'll see it was a goalless draw in both games, and even after extra time. And ironically, that was maybe part of the financial problem, because I lost, first of all, the Italians thought they were going to lose, and they didn't show up in great numbers. There were about 7,000 people there at the game, mostly Celtic fans. And on top of that, the satellite went for 152 minutes at $10,000 an hour, which was a lot of money in 1972, which I hadn't really planned on because the game wasn't supposed to last that long. But anyway, what I recall from that is that I lost most of my money at the time, and it was took me a long time to pay all the bills, and everybody got paid. But that Desmond White was very good to me at that time and gave me a very good break and getting the thing done, and was quite supportive. In fact, there was a lot of things happened. Italian radio tried to sort of pirate the game and put it on in opposition and so on, and he was very helpful in that. Anyway, I went back to the club in 1990 and talked to Jim. I think it was, well, at that time the chairman was Jack McGinn, and we asked him, what can I do to help? I have some capital. I'd sold my golf tour business. I was keen to, I thought the club needed, certainly needed some, they were not very, I think, expert in marketing or, dealing with their supporters in terms of customer service. I mean, I just couldn't see, there were certainly a lot of things, and he felt, well, we needed money. But what actually became clear over the next 4 years after going back and forth, I actually made a proposal to them whereby I would provide finance, and at that time, before the Taylor report, I was keen to have the park rebuilt with on a limited scale. At that time, with 24,000 seats, 12,000 either side, and 24,000 at either end, to 72,000 capacity, but mostly again still standing, 48,000 people standing. But it would be a much more economical, logical way to run in terms of the revenue for the club, and also market a whole program of season tickets. But their attitude was very much, we don't want season ticket holders. They're trouble. I mean, they just ask for everything and so on. And I realized slowly that going back and forth, the first question was always, when are you going back to Montreal, Fergus? And I realized they were really pretty much terrified of any change that might threaten their positions. And really, I'm glad the proposal I gave them, because it was a very generous proposal in terms of lending money at half the interest rate and working for nothing and with no say at all in control. That didn't happen. As I say, they couldn't take yes for an answer. So at that point, I realized, and this is when it came to the point, I didn't really have an agenda to try and take over Celtic. That was not my plan at the time.
So when did that plan enter your head then? Because it seems to me, when I recall, that you seem to be watching from afar.
Yes.
This sort of lurch towards oblivion that the club was.
Yes. That was going on all the time. That was going on over that period.
Yeah. So when did the plan to become a major player in Celtic actually take place?
Well, I came over there and started looking and talked to other people in Glasgow, other business people in Glasgow in 1992. And again, at that point, I was looking to see, well, is there a way that the club can be refinanced and possibly any kind of arrangement can be made, but it became very clear there was, what was missing, first of all, was capital, as they admitted. And secondly, the ability to do marketing and management. But eventually it became clear that the integrity wasn't there. I mean, there just wasn't the intent, the real intent. The most important thing in their lives was their own preservation. That was not, Celtic was really not the top of the list at all. And in fact, again, I was happy to do one of two things. I had a plan which required partners, and I was going to put up either the majority of the money and be the controlling shareholder, or if someone else was going to do that, I was happy to put up my £1 million, as you know, and say, well, here's my share, and not have any say. Just there's the support. I would have shares in the club, and someone else would take it forward. And that didn't happen. Basically, I was the main. In fact, some of the people who said they would support my plan and participate in it did not, and I was able to, I had to put in more money to replace that, and eventually, I think my initial project was £7.2 million, and eventually I put in more than £9 million, but I have to say I was very, thinking back, you know, very gratified with the fact people like John Keane came and was very much a supporter, and has stayed that way, and has been very supportive all this time, and still a big shareholder, and people like Albert Friedberg in Toronto, was not a particularly Celtic fan, but saw it was a logical thing to do, and he put his £1 million in, and he made money, and I'm glad to see that he did.
So would it have been then, Fergus, was this purely a business decision from you? Because it doesn't sound that way, or was it a mixture of...
It never started. It did not start as a business decision, but when you're putting in my case, 2/3 of your money, it has to be a business-like proposition. And I don't apologize for the fact that I wanted to try and work to do it on a viable. This is not a donation. This was an investment, and I felt it was worth investing, and I felt that the fans would hopefully come in as part of it, because that was part of the plan, to take the club public and have supporters, shareholders as well. And I felt that that could work. Yeah, I always did a lot of risk involved, but nevertheless, it was meant to be a rational thing, because I felt that Celtic was a good investment, but also very much under, shall we say, not well enough managed, in a sense, to make it a viable proposition, because it was, as you know, a bankruptcy, actually a negative situation. We would have been actually better off with a bankruptcy, because we wouldn't have to pay all the bills, but we had to pay all the bills even though there was no money there.
I remember also that there were many times when you were trying to gain some sort of control or foothold in the club where you would say, you would break camp and say, that's it, I'm going back, and that's it, finished, but then you would come back again. Was that part of a strategy, or...
Well, we were banging our head against the wall for a while, you know, trying to get the club to agree to proposals that made total sense, and we're just getting constant. And of course, you had a block of shareholders very much defending against that, and so it eventually came to the point where, you know, it became a ruinous situation whereby the pain was there, that they basically had no real choice but to cave in and basically avoid the bankruptcy, which I actually had to deal with the bank rather than the club initially, to take the bank out, because that was going to happen on the day.
Well, let's just clarify that, because there are some people today who would say, well, this notion that Celtic were 24 hours from closure is a myth, or was a myth. It is a myth. Was that actually the case?
Of course it was. They had a deadline at noon that day, and that's why I came overnight from I knew I only had 2 days warning, and I came overnight from Phoenix to be there and to be at the bank on the day to provide, and in fact do that at the time when I did not have control. I had to put up money in terms of debt. No guarantee of getting repaid.
Well, given that you're a businessman and everything's calculated, how did you not? Was that not a major concern for you?
Well, I knew at that point, basically at that stage, and the board knew that having put the money up, there was no way in the world that they could continue, and they just basically then, unfortunately, exacted, you know, payment for their shares, which I thought was a bit. These are the same people who are going and telling shareholders that the official rate is £2 or £3 a share, and please sell us your shares. They had this obligation to offer their shares to the board amongst their shareholders at that time, And they would, and then of course they said, well, we want £300 for our shares. I mean, the morality of that was, I think, among people like Michael Kelly, is something I think to be despised.
Can I ask you, Fergus, when after you got in and you'd got the control and you looked around the stadium, maybe it was teeming with people, and did you ever think at any time, my goodness, I've got their dreams and ambitions and hopes for this club in the palm of my hand here? Did that scare you at all?
It certainly did. I think that's a good question, because the time I was going to come to this, because I feel, in terms of the connection with the club as a supporter, that the time that comes to my mind, that sticks in my mind as being that kind of feeling, was when we put out the share issue at a difficult time, just lost a League Cup final to Raith Rovers, and winter of '94, and put out the share issue, put it together, hoped it was going to work. A lot of people said it's never going to work. Newspapers and so, this is going to, people are not going to put their money up to that level. They don't have that kind of, normal people take that kind of chance. And being at Celtic Park on the Friday night before the deadline for the share issue, in the pouring rain, and seeing all those people outside lined up, coming up the stairs, and I said, I'm feeling myself, this thing is going to happen. And I felt a very, very heavy responsibility. I just cannot let these people down. I mean, and it comes through, I think, in my own thinking going forward. And, and any time I was faced with a deal that was a bad deal, I would be able to say no, because I've got a responsibility. It's not just my money. People borrowed money to put into Celtic. 10,000. They put up £10 million. That has never happened before or since. No other football supporters have ever done this. And that was a very, basically that's also a question that comes up about, leaving with a profit. The last thing I want to do is leave with a loss, but they would have made a loss as well.
Yes. I mean, can I ask you, the fans would probably consider that the stadium would be your finest legacy, even though you actually empowered fans in that sense, because they weren't allowed to buy into clubs at that time. But they would consider the stadium your finest legacy. Would you agree with that, or is there something else that you're trying?
Well, I don't see it as much of a personal thing. I really do this. I know that at the time the question comes up, at the time it did come up, got to get the team right, got to get the team right, got to fix the team, stadium doesn't matter, we'll stand in the mud. That is the emotional reaction. But the practical answer was you had to have a new Celtic Park, because A, it was threatened it was going to be closed, B, you really have to have a modern stadium to produce the revenue to make a club viable. It's one of the most important things you've got to have. You can't live on the hope of a television contract and play in a stadium with nobody there. So it had to be done. And the plan we put together was, it was an ambitious plan, 60,000 seats, but I felt that it could be done, and it could be, we could provide the season, we'd have the market in terms of season tickets to be able to fill it. But yes, in terms of a stadium, it was actually more important than I thought it was. It was important from a business standpoint, from the club's necessity, but it was also important, I think, and it is important now, as a symbol. It stands, and dominates the skyline of the East End of Glasgow, and it's a symbol of where Celtic have come to, and I think it's I think that people can be proud of, and I think they like the stadium. The great thing is the stadium turned out so well, and the sightlines are great, and it's a great arena, and it contributes a great deal to the atmosphere of the games, and it's basically a wonder when many visiting clubs come there to see this is no backstreet operation. This is a major place.
Yes, and I think, over the years since the ground was rebuilt, there's been numerous clubs have come and supporters and said, what a fabulous place. Now, and there is no finer stadium in our country anyway, on a European night in particular, because there's a special atmosphere there, and the general shape of that stadium lends itself to that. Is that by accident, or was that design?
Not at all. I think we had to get, one of the design issues, I have to come in, some of the people that helped with that, and people like Charles Martin, who was the project manager there, this was a very tough deal. A lot of tough things had to happen in a very short time there, as you know. And we got this built. We had to spend a fortune pouring cement into the 150 feet down to fill in all the mine workings underneath because they didn't know what was there. And we got some support from the city of Glasgow. They were kind enough to sell the air above the cemetery to the club. That was their contribution, was to sell the air. I thought that was quite ironic compared to what you see in this country. But anyway, I think the design came out very well because we are able, in that stadium, the worst seat, or let's say the last seat behind the goal, is 50 meters from the goal line. And in the case of what it was before, that person standing there was 100 yards from the goal line. So the views of the game, people have a much better view, sometimes better than the referee, which you probably noticed. In terms of the opinions of the fans, they have a better view of what went on. So that's a great thing.
By the time you left then, it's been about 6 years now, and yet you've got this fabulous stadium, and Celtic have this fabulous stadium, but you don't often get back. Why is that?
Well, it's just that I'm here. I think personally, I don't want to be seen as being, appearing there and sort of making. And as I say, I've stayed away. I've not done any interview with the media at all in that period. I've gone back once when my mother died. I took her back for burial in Scotland, and I went to a game then. But my children were pretty small, and we tend to, take trips to suit them. And in fact, most likely we'll eventually get to Scotland on a holiday and spend some time there. Most of all my immediate relatives are no longer in Scotland and in Canada. My wife's mother comes to visit. We're very busy here. I mean, it's just like before. I would get back occasionally, but I don't really have specific connections in Scotland on a long-term basis.
You did manage to see the team 2 summers ago in America when you played it.
Yes, I went to see a game down at Hartford, which is a couple of hours drive. Went down to a game one evening in the summer, just a summer tour.
It would be
Liverpool, right? Disappointing result, but there was a good crowd of fans there and so forth. It cost me $110 to get in, by the way. I hope that tour was a good deal for somebody. I hope it was useful for the club.
One of your last acts was to sort of forge the contract which kept Henrik Larsson at the club. Now that was taking your wage level onto a different level again, but was that necessary? Do you feel it was necessary for the club, or do you feel that you had to leave the fans something?
No, it was strictly I think he was paid the right. It was a very rich deal, definitely, but I think he was worth it. I mean, he clearly had to be played at that level, and I didn't have any problem with that. It wasn't a question of changing everybody else's salary at the time. Of course, in footballs being what they are, every good footballer thinks he's a great footballer and expects to be paid accordingly. And but nevertheless, I know I have no problem doing that. I think it was the right thing to do because he's a player of the quality that just really deserved it, and certainly I think he delivered good value.
Now, we were hearing at Celtic's AGM recently that they'd lost something like £38 million over the last 5 years. But so clearly, wages are high, and would anything work? I mean, from what you've seen in American sport or what you know of American sport, like a salary capping system, would that be a viable option in football? Do you think? Would football players and agents go for it?
Well, I don't know. I've never seen anybody volunteer to take less money as a footballer. He hasn't happened very often. But I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. You could say, what do you learn from here? Maybe there are some things general things that might be applied. It's a different environment, Jim. It's not the same. You've got North America in the major leagues. You've got something like 10 million fans for every club in each sport, whereas in Scotland you get 5 million population and a whole host of clubs. You have things like luxury tax on payrolls in baseball, and you have a salary cap in basketball, and you have things like that. But you also have the fact the owners control the game, and they control the minor league farm systems that serve their own clubs.
Would that work then?
Well, I suspect that it's going to have to keep moving in that direction in the UK, I suppose, unless professional teams really, the professional team investment is so great now, you can't really expect it to be beholden to shall we say, amateur association people who are not really at risk. And I think that's part of the environment. You come back to the environment. Is the environment tough? And I presume, and I don't pretend to know what the solution would be in terms of Celtic's environment. It's obviously in a very limited scale environment, even though it is a huge brand. I think, and I don't know what I guess I'm sure the club are working on ways, if they possibly can, to try and change that structure, if they so that Celtic can do something, can play on a bigger stage, if you will, and I think probably be better for all concerned. You know, as you look towards probably fewer big clubs, you know, or fewer clubs that can be big. I think that's got to happen somehow.
Well, given the obstacles, the restrictions there because of the environment and because of the way football is structured in Scotland, the way it's administered, do you feel it's impossible for Celtic or even the Rangers, either half of the old firm, to win a Champions League trophy, for instance?
Well, it's not impossible. I mean, you can see, the nice thing about football is that there's always the possibility of winning. I mean, the small team can win, and Greece can win the European Championship and so on. But it happens rarely. I mean, it's not going to be very often. But I think that Celtic have shown that despite their limited environment, they've done quite a... I mean, given their circumstances, they've done very well. It's a very worrying thing. You've got £38 million of losses, and that represents either shortage of income, and they've done pretty well, like a £70 million turnover. Commend the club for getting to that level. But it also means that we spent £38 million more on salaries over that period than the income could cover, and it's there, it's a fact. So whereas you have the clubs in the English Premier League with the luxury of quite substantial income over in a much more stronger league, and I really don't think it's a huge. It's like fighting one hand tied behind your back, and I think it's going to maybe get tougher before it gets better, because the pressures are there, and players are very mobile. You know, the loyalty factor is no longer what it used to be.
Was that a problem for you when you were there? Did that bother you at all, or did you quite understand that football's they're transient, they come and go?
I tell you what I didn't like was people, players swearing loyalty and they're gone the next minute, you know what I mean? I mean, I've seen that happen, you know, I think that's pretty cynical. I saw that a few times. People would, you know, the jersey, and then they're gone. So, but anyway, leaving that aside, I would say, really looking at I presume they've got to look at all the options they can find. With European integration, you know, it's legally less defensible to restrict leagues to national boundaries, or even in the case of boundaries within the UK, as you have in Scotland, England, and so on. So it's the possibilities are there to do things properly. The law is not governed by, even though I think Annie Walker once used this term to me, saying we're governed by football law. And I say, well, sorry, I think I was governed by the law. There just is only one law. So you have European law, which I think is more, supersedes football law, shall we say.
I think so. But
and maybe that'll change things. I don't know.
But the problem is we still have too many people who fall back on that. And, you know, we always say as supporters, why do the clubs not change it? Because the clubs can influence. In fact, it's the club representatives who make up the bulk of it. SFA, the Scottish League.
Yeah, but the same thing in UEFA and so forth. But don't forget, it's a bit like the UN, I suppose. You've got the structure is such that and very largely the tail can often wag the dog, and you have Western Samoa has a vote with FIFA, you know, and so on, and Monaco has a vote at the United Nations, and you know. So that kind of setup is difficult for the, shall we say, the market to prevail, and basically people to get what they want to pay for and receive it. So there is a tension, and I think, but eventually I'm sure the logic is going to prevail, and I think television will have a big say in that, and I think eventually, and maybe there'll have to be some pain before clubs want to give up, let's say, their little particular network.
You've talked about how difficult it is for a club like Celtic, with Celtic's ambitions, to break free of those restraints and do something in the Champions League, for instance. But how difficult, thinking back or looking back, was it for you to deal with that that thinking, the way the game was run, when you were trying to do what you wanted to do to drive Celtic forward?
Well, I experienced that in different, I guess, as you say, maybe in just the same way or in different ways to that. I mean, and this is one of the things that maybe I'm criticised for, being maybe in a hurry or being giving people short shrift or getting into some conflicts. Unfortunately, you know, in 1984, there wasn't much time. Time was very much against us. I mean, we had to rent Hampden Park for a year. Very difficult circumstances. Not a friendly environment by any means.
What do you mean by that? During a game, or do you mean...
No, I'm talking renting for a whole year. We had to rent Hampden Park.
Yes, I know, but when you say not a friendly environment...
I'm just having... There's that arrangement, basically.
Yes,
to
right.
work with the people there was very difficult, and so on. So there were some conflicts, and of course some of the habits and so forth, and people with entrenched positions were difficult to deal with when you're trying to get some things done. And my objective, I was trying to do things on behalf of the club, and we were not surrounded by friends, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people with different agendas here, in football and outside football. So maybe I get, shall we say, criticised for getting into some battles with a few people, but I think they were necessary. Maybe my style, I don't know, but I feel that I had to fight the club's corner, and sometimes that was public.
Did you feel then at some times, in some occasions, that it was a club almost alone standing against
Well,
that
sometimes
authority?
you feel that, I suppose, on a couple of occasions, which I won't go into, but on the other hand, you think that logic and right will prevail, and I think in the end you have to just keep your eye on the ball. And don't forget, I didn't go to Scotland as a politician. I didn't go there to become popular and get voted into or be elected next year. I came there with a project which I wanted to achieve, and it was not an easy one. I'm delighted to say that I got the support that I did from the fans. I got support from other key people, and I think we made progress in that time. So I don't have too many regrets looking back. I probably have a few, I suppose. One
of my regrets, obviously, I've said it often enough, is that we should never have rebuilt Hampden. I mean, were you, or were there many people in football at the time you were there who felt the same, or were you a voice alone in that as well?
People would say the same, but not do anything about it. That was the trouble. I mean, that particular situation was, in my opinion, just a no-brainer, if you call it an American expression. I mean, £64 million went into Glasgow's number 3 stadium.
Yes.
Of public money, which could, you know, think of what that could have done for Scottish football. I mean, could you have had, I mean, who knows what the possibilities could have been. Maybe I wasn't proactive enough, I don't know. Maybe it was already on a course that you couldn't do much about. But, and by the way, you know, 2/3 of Hampden is not exactly a great stadium for the people with the seats in the terracing. Frankly, I feel it's a shame that that money could, think of all the training grounds you could have had in Scotland instead.
And
you could have played, for all the games that Scotland play, or finals and so forth, I mean, who knows, maybe if I'd been more proactive, maybe David Murray would have been saying something like, look, we'll give Celtic Park and Ibrox no charge as long as that money goes to help the game as a whole, rather than a stadium that's going to really be sitting there empty all year.
What's your relationship like with the supporters now? I mean, obviously you don't go to Celtic Park much because you live in Boston, clearly, but even when you see supporters here or come across them in America, how are you greeted?
I tend to get recognised a bit here, you know, and sometimes people, and I find them they're very welcoming and very, very positive and very friendly, and they want to shake hands and they want to sign this and that, and I'm happy to do it. And I'm very happy that I think supporters realise that I wanted, whether they may want to be a critic, and that, you know, supporters have always got the right to criticise.
Okay, Curtis McCann and then Tom Bolt. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
The unveiling of the championship in 98-99 season,
yeah,
you were booed when you unfurled it.
But they're still supporters. That doesn't mean to say.
Did you understand that reaction at that time?
You have to accept it. It's a fact. You know, people. I mean, people are entitled to that. They're supporters, but the point is, and maybe eventually they'll accept the fact that, you know, they'll figure it out and say, well, 1998, wait a minute, we won the league, or we just built the stadium, we just made a profit for the first time. I mean, you know, fine, Wim Jansen is gone, but the club's better for it.
So that wasn't a regret then? Was it a regret at the time? Because you wouldn't know if the club...
I mean, you certainly don't enjoy it, you know, just put it that way, but you have to just move on.
No, I'm talking about when the manager left. I mean, was that a regret of yours at the time, or did you... Because you wouldn't have known at that point that things would get better.
Well, I would say that in the case of Wim Jansen, they ought to get better. And in the case, I mean, we won the league with him there, but I imagine that we'd certainly do better without him. And that became true.
Can I ask you just on a chairman's role now? I mean, you are a former chairman, you're a former club owner. Should club owners have the right to perhaps demand more from the managers when the manager wants a particular player? In that, should there be a more scientific approach to it rather than just the manager coming and saying, I'm the manager, this player is a good player, you don't need to know why, just buy him?
Well, I think that's fair. I think you'd expect the manager to justify and have done his homework and to show he's done his homework because you're spending a lot of money on his behalf. And I think the other way, it shouldn't go the other way. It shouldn't be the chairman or the non-football person trying to tell the manager, I don't suppose either, because the manager is being paid a salary, a lot of money, to find the right players and to field the right players, to motivate the right players and so forth. So, but nevertheless, you're right. I think it should be more, it probably is, and I think it's getting more scientific, that assessments of players, you now get more statistical information and much more research. But I mean, managers have got to go and see players. A big part of their job has got to be having their finger in the scouting operation constantly, and they should be responding to that rather than listening to phone calls from agents all the time.
Yeah. Fergus, just can I ask you, how would you like to be remembered, if at all? I mean, everybody likes to be remembered by somebody, but how would you like to be remembered by Celtic supporters or Celtic, that club?
Well, to be honest, I'm more interested in how Celtic does, to be honest. I'm quite happy to be anonymous and have nothing personal and not talk to you again about this and carry on in my life, you know, and that's fine. And things move on, and I think I did my thing for a while, and I hope it made a contribution, and it's looked upon that way. And I think I did. People to think I had Celtic's interest as my first choice, as my first interest, and I was there for a good reason. And I think I'm quite happy. People just take its course, and hopefully, you know, I think the people who matter. The people who matter in football are the players.
Well, would it embarrass you? I mean,
the players are what people come to see. They don't
Yes.
come to see. I find it. I mean, people find it amazing here. There's so much profile attached now to people in my position, whereas in fact, much less so here. I mean, you don't. The players are the ones that you want to connect with, basically. I mean, there just isn't the same sort of criticism level of owners here.
Is that a good thing, Fergus?
Well, I don't know. As long as
It's not for newspapers, not for television.
Maybe not. I don't know, but newspapers seem to get enough to write about the players. I mean, as far as I know.
You do some charitable work as well, but you seem a bit modest in that because my understanding.
Well, I'm not doing very much. So the answer, I'm modest for a good reason.
But you've been that way inclined, though, haven't you?
Well, no, I'm more so now. I think we get on to the issue of the Celtic Charity Fund, like I mentioned before, and you talked about the stadium, and you talked about the reason I'm talking to you now is because I'm very keen to point out that this is an important event that's coming up in a few days, which is the unveiling of the statue to Brother Walfrid, and I want to make the point to you about that. First of all, I'm glad about the charitable program is continuing at the club. But secondly, I think looking at that event that's coming up, first of all, I commend the Supporters Association for doing that, and Jim Divers for progressing that whole and leading that whole initiative, because I think it's a symbolic thing. Yes, you know, the roots of the club, immigrant population from Ireland back in the 1800s, and I think supporters, even although they may not have, you know, similar backgrounds, you know, going back to the East End of Glasgow, whether they're Pakistani or whether or in Germany or wherever their supporters can be found, I think they should all be proud of the fact that that's where the club came from, and they are part of that. I mean, I personally, I feel a personal affiliation with that because I look back, when I was at Celtic Park, when I got a letter from a supporter in Edinburgh, and he sent me a whole chart of my
Family tree?
Family tree going back, yes, to show, and I hadn't seen that, going back to 150 years or so, and showing that my great-great-grandfather, Tom McCann, came from Ireland to Scotland, was a stocking maker in Glasgow. And I know that, I think it was my great-grandmother, one of my relatives around that time died in a poorhouse. And you think, you know, and it's the same way that even though, who knows how many of those supporters today who are sitting and spend, you know, hundreds of pounds for season tickets, that their ancestors were not sitting at one of those dinner tables in 1888 with, you know, having to be fed. And I think, and you've got to look beyond that and say, well, we have a responsibility to charities, but also the fact we're part of a club that goes back with to that origin. And so I think looking at the, and you look here, and we have this modern stadium, and this is where, I put the two things together in a sense and say, well, here is Brother Walfrid's memorial to where the club came from. This is where we've come from. And here is this great Celtic Park, and this is where we are today.
Now, by the time you left Fergus, did you feel you'd achieved what you set out to achieve, both on and off the pitch?
Well, I suppose my objectives really were three things. I wanted to refinance the club, put it on a footing where it was stable and it was not threatened with and long term, if possible. Provide the capital, and secondly, the structure in terms of people running it. And one thing I feel good about is the fact I was able to get a very good management group together. So, you know, there's a lot of people working there. There's about 450 employees, but some of the senior people I think I brought in were very good. It was a very good team, not just the football side, the business side, and the publishing and all the other activities. And I got that, I think, in place. And I think one thing I felt I was reasonably good at was hiring people who were smarter than me into jobs that could do better than I am, and that goes for both football and non-football. And thirdly, obviously we had to get the infrastructure of the stadium right. And results on the field, I mean, you could say, well, you know, it's not, maybe you didn't accomplish enough in those 5 years, you know, league championship. So I felt we made progress. I think the club, when I left, was in better shape. I like to think it was in better shape than when I got there, for sure. And I think it was on a path to get better. And I think the question for me right now is, how's the club been doing? And the answer is, I think the club has done very well since I left. And I mean, it was a great, for me as a supporter, I'm speaking to you only as a supporter here, I'm really sorry that I didn't get to go to Seville. I mean, that was a real disappointment, and that was such a great thing. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, only happens once maybe in a generation if you're fortunate. It was just a terrific event, a milestone. So the club, I think, has progressed from there. The main thing is the curve is in the right direction. You know, Jim, I think I'll make a point to you about what is the level of success that people are expecting. What are they entitled to, or I mean, if I talk to you as a supporter, and I'm sure this is shared by many supporters, what a supporter wants is to be proud of the club. He doesn't expect the club to win every game or to win every championship every year and so forth. But in the case of the Celtic supporter, there's a lot of pride attached to not just the history, but also its present stature to him and to the community. To a lot of people, they identify with the club. And in terms of what is expected, I would put it this way, I would like to think or want, the objective is that when any team comes to Celtic Park, they know they're in a game. You know, Celtic are able to compete at the level with anybody. And I think that's what people aspire to. They don't expect to constantly beat Barcelona, but they want to be there. I mean, to me, just as important, almost maybe not as important as Seville, but you think about that game with Bayern Munich, who came and got a goalless draw, and the players are celebrating because they came to Celtic Park and they got a draw. To me, that's a big deal. I think that shows what the level that the club wants to be and wants to aspire. And it's not an easy thing by any means, and I commend the people in charge for working so hard to try and make it happen.
Any regrets? I mean, when you think back in your work at Celtic Park in Scottish football, is there a major regret? Anything that bothers you to this day?
No, really, I suppose you could say there's always ways you could second guess, and you could have done something better, you could have done something earlier, or do something that you didn't do and change it. I suppose I think we're fortunate to meet Dr. Joseph Venglos. I wish I'd met him much earlier. I have a great regard for him. Would love to have seen him earlier in the club a few years earlier, and maybe also with a general manager. I think that structure would have worked better for us. And I think that would have been a good idea. It was a good idea at the time, and I think it's the way that perhaps maybe the football eventually might go.
Just finally, Fergus, you've been out for a long time now, about 6 years. Do you ever miss the chase?
Miss being there? Not really. I think I've done my thing, and I'm quite happy to, move on from there and feel that I've made. If I hadn't, I tell you what, if I hadn't gone, I would have very much regretted it.
Right. Would you ever go back into the game with Celtic or any other club?
No, I don't think so.
Never?
I would. Celtic's the only club I'd be interested in, and in any case, I've done my thing, and it's up to other people to do better, and I'm sure they will.
Fergus, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.